All right. Hi there, everyone. I am super excited to be here today on my second Foodie Chat. It is September. This is September's Foodie Chat, and I am so excited because I have known this lady that you can see on screen with me, well, not known, but known on social media, probably for about 3 years. We originally connected over a storybook that I wrote at my family table. And Anya, who you can see here, wrote me an email and asked if I would be able to send it to New Zealand. And I said yes, of course. And then in introducing herself and the background that she was involved in, we just sort of connected then further on social media and watching Anya's passion for food and then come alive with the way that she practices her passion of food as a professional childcare chef and seeing, I mean, I'm sure Anya's always had that passion for food, but seeing her communication of it on social media for the way that she believes and runs that in her centres as the head chef and nutrition advisor is truly amazing. And I am thrilled that Anya agreed to come on and have a foodie chat with me today. So thank you, Anya, for coming on.
Thank you. It's so lovely to actually talk to you after, as you say, I think it's 3 or 4 years.
Or maybe 4.
Yeah, and can I just say that book is still my favourite book. If I'm ever trying to explain to someone about food being more than nutrition, often the easiest way for me is to just read them the book. I actually did it last night in a PD for our team.
Oh, lovely. Yeah. That's actually going to make me cry, Anya. Thank you. Anya, as I mentioned, so you have been a chef for a very long time and worked with food, and now currently your role is as the head chef and nutrition advisor for the Nurture Early Learning Centre group in Auckland in New Zealand. So we have Trans-Tasman, which is wonderful, and so such a wonderful role that a childcare centre has in their centres as well. But I wanted to, first of all, just kind of delve back to Anya, little Anya, and perhaps maybe where your love and passion for food came from, and perhaps when or what was it that helped you realise that you could actually use your passion for food for using that for work and for good and for health and for other people.
Yeah, so that is delving quite a long way back. My mother loves cooking, and she always had a very big vegetable garden. We've lived in places like Zambia in Africa where we had to be quite self-sufficient. So she had a giant vegetable garden there. And also my family background is mixed, English mother, German father. And so when the family was getting together, we were in Zambia most of the time. So we were always connecting over food, as people often do, and often different types of food. So our German Abendsbrot was quite different to what we would have had at home. So I kind of feel that I've always gone to a table with a very open mind, and there's always delicious stuff that you're going to get. And it's sort of grown from there, I guess. I've always been involved in the cooking with my mum. And then when I was 13, I got a job washing up at the local pub restaurant. At that time, we were living in the UK, which as soon as you have a little bit of experience in a job, of course, it's the easiest route to take. I've worked in a pub. That led up to working in the kitchen there, which led to me finding a job when I was at university cooking for a sailing school.
Yeah.
So a lot of my cooking jobs have, through the years, quite a few of them have involved young people, and also less restaurant-y and more nourishing large groups of people who need to be fed well.
Yeah.
So some examples of that I've catered for a sunsail cruise in Turkey, which is where I met my New Zealand husband. And I was doing that alongside actually freelancing as a chef on the super yacht, so going from one extreme to the other.
Wow.
Yeah, so basically, I've always worked as a professional cook in one capacity or other since I was a teenager, with a few gaps in between. And then it was about 7, 8 years ago, as my children were growing up, they were sort of mid teens by then. And I was looking for what I was going to do next, after having focused so heavily on being a mum. It was like, okay, time to start thinking, what am I going to do after, that they are growing up? And an opportunity came up in a local childcare centre to be the chef or the cook. And I didn't really think twice about it because I knew it was a job that I can go into without thinking too hard about it. But I hadn't really thought about what I was going to find when I went in there. So that, yeah, there are very different centres out there, and that one was quite an eye-opener about what was known about how we're feeding children, what was provided. They often, or this particular one, didn't pay very well, and it didn't pay for many hours.
Yes.
Which surprised me quite a bit. So yeah, it was an eye opener.
Yeah. Wow.
But it also prompted me to think, okay, you know what? I think I can make a difference.
And have you what?
I like to think that I've certainly made a difference from where I started there. So yeah, that was really what drove me. I think I came home one day and said, you know what, I think I can make a difference. I'm just going to stick this out. Because it was at the situation where it was like, well, you can go and do anything else that you want to do at this stage. But for some reason, I decided that this was my calling. This was going to be my challenge. And yeah, here I am.
Well, I hats off, because I think, you can easily walk away, because as you did mention, it is sometimes in some centres they don't put a lot of attention on that particular area of the centre, and they have very short hours to be able to create the food, and the pay sometimes isn't as good as perhaps what you were earning as a professional chef in other capacities, and for other people. I mean, I know I personally experienced that when I finished up at a processing plant here that I was doing some work for. I went and took a job at a childcare centre to see what it was like as well, and it is very confronting, and very hard. But was the centre that you were originally at, I assume you're not there now anymore, but no, I know you're not there now, but were they receptive to the ideas that you had, or did you find it difficult to be able to implement different menus that were healthier, or what at that time you thought was a good option, or did you get a lot of pushback on that?
I think the conversation basically went, because I said to them after about day 2, I said, I'm not comfortable cooking what's on your menu. Do you mind if I change it? And I'm pretty sure that they said, you can do what you like so long as you stay in budget.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And beyond that, they pretty much left me to it. So I definitely, in the period that I was there, I did what I was comfortable with. I've very much if I'm not going to feed it to my children, why would I feed it to someone else's child?
Yeah.
And then the second centre that I went to after that one, they were looking for someone to design and implement a sugar-free menu.
Yeah.
Which, of course, the whole philosophy was much more, they cared, basically. They cared about the whole thing. And so that, again, was a nice challenge. And that set me up very nicely for when I started with Nurture in Onehunga. That was a build. So I had seen this building being renovated and changed into a childcare centre, and it was literally down the road from where I live.
Fantastic.
So I was eagerly waiting for it to open. And in fact, I think it was about 6 weeks before they were due to open that I emailed the owners at their other centre and said, I see you're going to be opening soon, and I expect you'll need a cook at some stage. And yeah, sort of essentially the rest is history. So
So, in terms of just to dial back, when you said, like, in terms of what you're comfortable in feeding your children, what were you able to actually achieve? I know, because I find sometimes that some childcare chefs that get in contact with me, sometimes they do have pushback from management or owners, and it often is the conversation, well, if you can meet budget, then that's fine. So, are you able to give a little bit of an idea of some of the things that you were able to introduce on a very tight budget? Like were you cooking from scratch, or were you sort of deciding, look, what I might do here is I might get something there that's quite processed, but I'm happy with that, and then I prefer to get this that's good? Or how did you manage your budget by still, because I know you're very passionate about whole foods, so how were you able to manage that, or in sort of a budgetary kind of capacity?
Essentially, so whilst I've been an at-home mum with our three children, we were on quite a tight budget.
Yeah.
And I've never really eaten processed foods at home. My mum always cooked from scratch. That's what I know. So I was just doing the same kind of cooking that we'd always done. And the old favourites of when you make spaghetti bolognese, you bulk it out with the cheapest vegetables and some lentils. And those kind of cooking. When I thought about it, the other little tricks that I was doing there was when I was making the muffins and things through the week, I would get one giant can of canned fruit, and then try and make that stretch over as many meal times as I could.
Yeah.
So that'd be 1 week would be apple week, the next week would be peach week, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and then that drove me a little bit more to, especially when you're wanting to be giving really nourishing foods, just to start looking a lot more deeply at traditional meals and how they're made. For example, chicken broths, which I hadn't really used so much at home, but at the time they were just starting to really become very popular. And of course, when you buy chicken frames, there's actually quite a lot of flesh on them. If you really are strapped for cash, you can get enough meat off the chicken frames to make a decent meal that is nourishing.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's really
fish frames.
Yeah, I think that's really lovely. Just, talking about that, you really just went back to the basics, the really basic meals. You're not trying to be fancy and reinvent the wheel. If you go back to the basics and look to the sort of nourishing traditional foods that people ate, and really a lot of them aren't heavy on meat or things like that, which is a huge cost often for a food budget, and using things like the offcuts that we don't normally use. So being quite clever with where you're going to get your protein from, and stretching it out. I think that's a wonderful tip, because often people do rely on something that's sort of pre-done, or value added, but then that makes it obviously more expensive. And often, at being my background being food science, when you process it, to make it cost effective for the processor, they take the good stuff out and put other stuff back in. That's how the equation works. That's how they make money. So I think that's a really a beautiful approach, just keeping it really traditional and going back to the basics.
Yes, yeah. And again, you can utilize everything. So all the vegetable offcuts and peelings, that can be the base for your broth.
Yes.
So you really don't need to throw anything away. And if you do have a garden, we do it at work. Of course, it has to compete with the little fingers that try and harvest it a bit early. we have things that aren't allowed to grow or have grown really leggy. But there's no reason you can't use those either. I think perhaps in general, we're just so used to things looking perfect and Instagram worthy, or like it's at a restaurant, that we forget what real food actually looks like.
Yes.
And we can use so much of it. So for me, there's been a lot of just rethinking how I look at the food.
Yes.
And then probably the other big thing that I did start very early on was around bread, because children love bread, and sandwiches and toasties and toast always feature on childcare menus. I mean, I guess they like it, and it's also perceived as being easy. But I decided back then I can be very stubborn, and I decided I wasn't feeding my children the cheap, nasty bread, which is on most childcare budgets, that's the only bread you can afford. So it's like, well, I'm refusing to buy this. So that means I have to make my own bread, which I'd never made bread before, never bothered. So all of a sudden I had to learn very quickly how to make bread and surprise myself that it's actually very easy.
It's so easy, isn't it? I've only learned over the last couple of years. It's amazing. And you feel so good about it as well. Something so simple.
And yeah, and it looks good, smells good, fills the whole centre with this amazing aroma of baking bread. And you can comfort yourself that it's a lot better than what you're buying.
Yes.
And of course you can change it up in any way. I've had leftover beetroot, thrown that in the bread, leftover porridge. Of course, the other thing with childcare centres is the waste, because some days there's absolutely nothing and you could have made twice as much. Other days there's heaps left. That is a very hard thing to manage, because you're managing a lot of things there. So again, having a lot of tricks up your sleeve to use those leftovers. And I've discovered that anything that we use using oats, so we do overnight oats, porridge, baked oats, things like that. If there's any left over, turn it into a loaf of bread. Brilliant.
Yeah, beautiful.
It's really, really comforting.
So one thing that, just to talk about bread just quickly, one thing often when I deal with people with sourdough stuff, they talk about, it's quite difficult to make, or even when I've been in centres and I talk about like slow cookers and they say that they don't have bench space or whatnot. How do you manage your longer cook or longer process? I don't know if you do sourdough, if you do regular bread, which is still great, but do you have like bread cookers, or do you just do it and then put it into the oven, or how do you manage slow cookers with like broth and things like that on the bench?
Yeah, so I'm very sorry to say that my kitchen is normally a disaster zone, because I've got piles of produce, 3 different things on the go. When I'm making bread, I'm making 6 loaves, so there'll be 6 bowls set out. Meantime, I'm doing all of these other things. So in the morning, it's horrible. Sometimes I walk in and think this is actually embarrassing, because it's so messy. You can't see. So I apologise for that for everyone who wants my kitchen to be looking just so. But yeah, that's the kitchen functioning. 6 different things going on at once. And I've learned with the bread, I started off with a bread maker, but of course I only make 1 loaf.
Yes, that's very limiting.
For 80 children. Then I tried using my food processor to mix the dough, because I'd convinced myself that it was going to be really hard. And over the years, I've come down to the easiest thing is you put your dry mix in 6 bowls lined up on the bench, put your water in 6 bowls lined up on the bench, and work your way along. I give them a half, sort of draw them all together, and then go back to the beginning, dump them on the bench, give them like probably no more than a minute each.
Yeah.
Because I don't time than that. That's enough. And then they get shoved over into whatever corner I can stack them up in whilst I'm doing morning tea. And then during morning tea, they've usually risen enough that you can put them in the pans, and then they all go in the oven. So
beautiful.
Yeah, there's a lot going on, but for me keep it simple, I say.
Yeah.
The broth, yes, I do use the slow cooker. For the broth, just on a low overnight.
Yeah.
So by the time I've left in the afternoon and back again in the morning, like 11, 12 hours, and that gives it a good brew. Other ways are to have it ready to go on the stove in the morning, and then, an hour or so before you're leaving. Again, it's going to depend what hours someone's doing.
Yeah, sure. One of the things you said about the bread, sorry, I'm slightly obsessed with bread at the moment, but I think it ties really nicely into what I want to ask you next is the smell of the bread. So when we talk about food, obviously, and I know you're online with this, what you're eating is so important, but how you're eating and the environment that you set up for the children really is, when they're learning about food, is really if not more important. And I think, I mean, if you look on your Instagram account, your Anya's Family Kitchen, and also the Nurture Early Learning, you can see you put a lot of effort into these beautiful, they're like restaurant. You say that it's simple food, but it's like beautiful grazing boards that you put out for the children. And the idea of the smell of bread as you walk in, I mean, that's just the idea of dreams for children, but their families, that to know that they're dropping them off in this environment. So can you tell us a little bit about your sort of philosophy that you're using in the centres in regards to how you eat and how you're serving your beautiful, nourishing food?
Yeah, so first of all, I think in general everyone has realised that how we eat is almost more important than what we eat.
Mm.
If you're not in a nice, calm, feeding environment, then everything tends to go out the door. You know, your behaviour, the food that you're eating, because you're just not going to eat it.
Yes.
Everything. No positive associations with the mealtime. That's all gone if you don't have that environment set up. And we've very much found that by focusing on the environment as a team and creating that calm, positive place, nutrition follows.
Yes.
So it's all about trust, and it's all about relationships. And trust, of course, is something that we all struggle with a little bit. But honestly, if you can just trust that the child's got the eating, they don't need us to control what they're going to choose or how much they're going to eat.
Yes.
In this dynamic, as the adult, they are expecting that we're going to make the right choices for them. That's almost our moral expectation, that we will be providing nutritious food for them. So we don't need to control what they're eating any more than that.
Hallelujah.
And we've seen it working so many times.
Great.
Calm, harmonious meal times where there's just pleasant conversation going on. When the toddlers are eating, it's fantastic because they come in and they're so enthusiastic about life in general.
Yeah.
And you get settled down and they serve themselves. So all of our centres, the children serve themselves from a central dish or platter. And they're completely capable of doing that. That's the other one. Often people think that an 18-month-old is too young to be able to serve themselves. I beg to differ.
I beg to differ.
They're so happy. Their little faces when they're serving themselves, they're just so enthusiastic and happy about the whole experience. We then have a period of up to 10 minutes where it's completely silent. They are just busy eating and enjoying. And then as they start to get full and get to the end of their mealtime, the noise level starts to rise again.
I think that's a really interesting point, Anya, that you've just said, that 10 minutes. You know, people often ask, how long should I keep my child at the table, be that at home or perhaps in a childcare environment? And really it is kind of 10 minutes. That's where they're going to get there for those little ones, when they're going to eat the majority of their meal, right?
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask as well, when you talk about the eating environment, how do you sort of set that up? Because I know you talk about sort of the kitchen cafe sort of thing. Is there in the childcare rooms, do they have a certain area in each room that they eat, or do you have a room in your centres which is the eating room sort of thing? How's that set up for the little ones?
So one of the things I love about the nurture centres is when they built their first centre in Avondale. So Avondale was the first one, and then the Onehunga Centre was the second one, and they now have a third one in Red Beach. They had the vision way back then to create a space for eating, which became the kitchen cafe. Not many centres have a dedicated area just for eating and just for the kitchen. And that's wonderful because it really allows us as a team to focus on, when we come together for meal times, that's a time to come together for social connection.
Yes.
Rather than having to clear a play area, set it up as a meal area, and then change that all again. So that's the first wonderful thing. All of our kitchens as well are fantastic, like really well designed, and everything you're going to need in there. And then from there, it's providing everything that the children are going to need to self-serve. So that's going to have to be age appropriate. Sometimes takes a little bit of trial and error. So, for example, serving spoons, you don't want them to be too heavy or too big for the toddler group, but you can go a little bit bigger for the preschool group.
Yes.
Our mealtime, our snacks are generally, as you've mentioned from the Instagram, are generally grazing platters. So everything goes on the same platter. So it's big. Our tables fit 8 children at a time. So each platter has enough food, plenty of food for 8 children.
Yes.
And I've found, again, through a little bit of trial and error, that probably 4, possibly 5 items is anywhere 3 to 5 is about right.
Well, in terms of what's on the menu for like morning tea, 3 to 5. Yeah, great. So they've got the opportunity to choose what they might like.
Yes. So you're providing different food groups. But if you provide too much, they can find it overwhelming because they feel like they have to have something of everything. And then it becomes very slow for 8 children to serve themselves like that. So some of these can be real nuances, but just purely from 5 years I've been at Nurture Early 100 observing these meal times every day. And these are the things that just by watching, you just have these little light bulb moments of, oh, there's too much on that platter. It's causing confusion. I must remember next time to do less than that, but still be able to provide not only the variety in terms of nutrition, but also variety in terms of if there is a child that's not comfortable with one thing, they're always going to find something that they are comfortable with.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Yeah, and the same with generally how we would choose to serve our main meals. The lunchtime meals would be trying to provide it in a way that they have choice over what they can get. So
deconstructed?
Yeah, a little bit deconstructed, but if you spread it out too much, they will all go for one thing. Of course, in a childcare environment, you have a little bit of a herd mentality, particularly in the older groups. So it's like it's like a little, there's a lot of nuance in there. As think, you know your children, you sort of understand what's going to work and what really isn't going to work for them. And that changes every day. I mean, everything is organic anyway with young children. With the groups, at times there'll be majority at the younger end of the scale, or you could have a period of time where they're all at the older end of the scale. It's not always evenly spread. So there's a lot of nuances you can follow in terms of their age appropriateness. Yes. As you see, I could talk for hours on that.
I know, I love it. No, but I've got a little question because I know people often ask, about fussy eaters. Obviously, you've talked very much about, the way that you're feeding is very based on the division of responsibility, the adult's responsibility and the child's responsibility in feeding, which is fantastic. The family style eating that you're having with the sort of self-serve kind of, these are some really key theories that are great for eating. But one thing people often ask is, well, what if you do have a fussy eater? And so how do you see, I know from my own experience perhaps what the child might do, but what do you actually see in the wild at the childcare centre happen with maybe if a new child starts not at the beginning of the year with the rest of the group but comes in and is maybe a bit fussy in inverted commas? How do they sort of tend to roll with the style of feeding and eating that you're doing at the centres?
I might just approach this from a slightly different angle, but I'll still be answering the question.
Yes.
So when you don't have a consistent environment that you are actively trying to have everyone on board with no pressure, so really watching what we say and how we say it, how the children are served, which, as I said, family style, allowing them as much autonomy as possible, and making that space really calm and peaceful, a place to come together. When you've got that blank canvas, and the children have learned to trust that there will be no pressure on what they're eating, and there'll be nobody sitting there saying, come on, you've got to eat your carrots, or look at the broccoli, it's so yummy. All of those things they can perceive as being pressure. So when you have that blank canvas, most of the children, they're all eating happily, basically.
Yeah.
And that's when you can really figure out which children need more support in terms of eating, which ones are just having a bad day that day, because 9 times out of 10, when they're rejecting a food or playing up at the table, it's actually nothing to do with the food. They've brought in some other emotional baggage or something that's happening in the rooms or at home with them, and they actually need help to unload that before they're going to be able to eat calmly. And then, of course, as a team, we work very hard to be consistent in how we respond to these actions. So there's a lot of responsiveness, just to cover it very, very broadly, but we are very responsive to each child's issues on the day.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as we manage to get that blank canvas in place and set up the environment properly, where we went from thinking that perhaps we had, it's not unusual for people to expect 30 to 40% out of your role to be picky, fussy eaters.
Mm-hmm.
We went to, at the time, we had about 75 children, and out of that, there were 2 picky eaters.
Yeah.
And then you're able to really focus on where it's coming from.
Yeah.
And
there's underlying root causes there.
Yeah, is it? Do they need a little bit more help at home? Is there something physiological going on? And when you're in that situation, you're then able to communicate with the parents and say, hey, might pay to go and see your doctor. Perhaps there's something else going on. For example, over large tonsils in a toddler who's still pretty much nonverbal.
Mm-hmm.
If they've had that all of their life, they don't know any different.
Yeah.
So they don't necessarily know how to say, hey, you know what, this is really uncomfortable to swallow.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
But once you realise that, it's like, wow, it's just really obvious that he didn't like anything other than yogurt and bread, that kind of thing. So, yeah, and everyone is going to be a case-by-case basis anyway, but it's very hard to pick someone who's just having a bad day from someone who actually needs more support when you don't have that blank canvas to start with, when everyone's all up and down.
I think your basis of the no pressure, I know it might sound to some people as quite arbitrary, but it really is so powerful, creating an environment without any pressure for the children to eat. Because I think as well, as an adult, you obviously have your own baggage, feeding and eating baggage of your own. So sometimes you can hear yourself say something that isn't really appropriate. And like you said, saying, oh, doesn't the broccoli look yummy, is actually a form of pressure. It's creating attention on something. So how do you as a team, it sounds like, and I've seen on Nurture Erling's page, the use of the word respect a lot, which is really beautiful. But how do you as a team create this consistent approach to feeding and eating with the children? Because obviously you're the head chef, obviously you're at one centre, but you're responsible for the 3. How do you create that environment with all of the educators at the feeding and eating time?
Yeah, so this... as you say, it is working as a team, and that it takes time.
Mm-hmm.
It takes work. It's like any relationship. Relationships take work. We are really lucky that the resources for our professional development and ongoing learning are huge. We're really, really encouraged to utilise what's there. We're always being provided with quality professional development opportunities, including myself.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not a teacher, but I'm always included when there is something. which I so value because that's where I've learnt an awful lot as well. And it all applies, it all works in together, particularly when you pick up on the word respect. That the respect is across the board. It doesn't stop at lunchtime and get picked up again after lunchtime.
Yes.
In fact, the meal times are one of the big care moments. So again, it takes the whole centre to be working together to provide the opportunities to support, be offering the resources available to everyone, and little nuances, making sure that each of the teachers' well-being is looked after as well, because of course a teacher who's stressed doesn't have time to do the work that they're being asked to do, and is overtired. They need to be looked after as well. So it's that holistic view that not only the children, but the families and the teachers are all looked after within the realm of, I don't like using the word management, but
no, of course,
the overall view who are making those decisions and seeing where people need extra help at a time. So so
I think that's just wonderful. There's been a few times here that I've actually had a bit of a tear. I just think it's just so wonderful your colleagues and the people you work with are so lucky to have that environment, which is just simply lovely. But also if you guys are all happy and working well together, a relationship does take work, but that flows on to the children in your care, which is remarkable. And in this case with food, it obviously flows on into that as well, which is terrific. I just had a question that's just dropped out of my head. So I'm going to ask a different one. How do you think, looking in comparison with your lovely environment that you have, what do you think are the key issues for perhaps other childcare centres to how maybe like their top 3, maybe what they could do to be able to work from, say if they were at the sort of centre that you were at 8 years ago, what could they maybe do to start working in that direction to where you are now, which I would call almost gold standard, but you don't want to say that you've reached the limit because you can always improve more.
Oh no, there's plenty.
What do you think they could do? Some just like short little key advice.
Well, I think most people will have noticed from my Instagram page that there's actually not that much food on there. And I tend to talk more about how we eat rather than what we're eating. Obviously that's what I keep coming back to, is that the environment is key. And if you can get that right, then it actually doesn't matter what you're feeding them because they will eat it. Whereas when you look at it from the other point of view, when you're trying to tick the boxes of providing X amount of protein and X amount of fruit and vegetables, that's completely pointless if the children aren't eating it.
Yes.
So you have to get the environment right first. And I guess my 3 top tips that you could do tomorrow to change your eating environment would be serve family style, which means putting the food in the middle and allowing the children to serve themselves. Really paying attention to what you say and how you say it. And having a mindful moment before you start the meal. So when everyone's rushed in and the children's heads are still in the playground, the teachers' heads are still in I've got to get this all done and dusted and cleaned up in 10 minutes' time because the next group's coming through. When we're all in that state of mind, the vibes are there and the children pick up on it. They don't eat very well. Everything's a disaster and your afternoon basically goes downhill from there. So just taking that extra minute when you sit down at the table with your group of children and just bringing them all into the present, including yourself. Taking that deep breath, bringing yourself present, lowering your voice and slow down. There's no rush. If you can do that, then your meal times, even tomorrow, will be so much better. So much better.
Oh, Anya, that is just magic. It's so magic. I just, I think mindful eating and being aware of your food, and my husband often says, they say it takes 10,000 hours to become an expert in something, but we've been eating for so long and we're still not experts, and I think it's because we're focusing too much on other things. We're not sort of tuning in to where we are then and there, just being mindful of the food that's there and being grateful for it, which, and in a country like New Zealand and Australia, we're so lucky for the safe, nutritious and abundance of food that we have available for us. So that's
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
beautiful. On that, in terms of food abundance, and you've touched on food waste as well. Recently I was on an Instagram page of a education consultancy group for early learning, and I'd never really thought about this, but they had said 20 years ago, when they had been trained in their qualifications, that they were told never to use food in craft and in education, and because it was seen as a food waste. And from some families that might come from developing countries where food abundance isn't the case, that can be quite confronting. What's your idea on, obviously you have these wonderful meals and the environment there, but how do you include food education within your program? And do you see the use of food in that realm of education as a waste, or how do you manage that?
That's a great question. I'm really glad you asked, because, of course, food exploration is such a massive part of young children learning how to eat, especially the ones who are slightly anxious with newer foods. Allowing them the opportunity to approach them in their own space or time with absolutely no pressure even to put it near their mouths is just so vital. So there is a big difference between food as a learning tool versus playing with it. So the difference between making a necklace out of pasta pieces, for example, versus taking a couple of carrots and the children exploring it can be in various ways. It could be as simple as peeling and grating it, having a go at cutting it. Another step further on from there could be what happens when we apply heat, and go through the processes of cooking and mashing them. Our nurture centres are a regio centre, so we're very child-led, and when the children are involved in things like that, we're trying not to put words into their mouths, so to speak. So if they want to make a recipe, we'll often try and encourage them to work it out for themselves. So we have had pasta with strawberries.
Love it.
Situations like that, which you can't do without a teacher who's willing to embrace this idea. So I'm very, very lucky that I've got teachers who just dive in, boots and all, and allow the children these opportunities, because it's just gold dust. But your food exploration can be done in so many different ways, as simple as growing things. I mean, that's an awareness of where food's coming from, an awareness of the bigger picture, even down to things that are alive and things that aren't alive, and things that start off small and grow, but you can't eat it until it turns red. There's so much learning in there that I think perhaps we overlook, because it's a bit like riding a bike. Once you know how to ride a bike, you don't think about the processes to getting to that stage where you could ride it. So taking ourselves back to looking at the world of the world in general, but in my situation, the world of food and eating through the eyes of a child, and putting yourself back into those boots, and what are they seeing, what are they thinking. So there is quite a big focus on that, and we have also found that if there is a time when we feel that a mealtime didn't go particularly well, I kind of have a bit of a mental checklist, which from my point of view was, first of all, was it actually yucky?
Yeah.
Because if fair enough. Could I have served it differently?
Mhm.
Was it a bad day? Do they not know this food? Was there a lot of pressure? Was it really, was it a bit chaotic? Those kind of things.
Yes.
When you've ticked those off as being, wasn't that, then I would tend to encourage the teachers, perhaps it might be worth doing a food exploration that afternoon,
Yes.
in any way or form that they like. And in fact, now when I go into the rooms, the children have always got a little pile of herbs that they're chopping up and putting into water, or lemons that they're squeezing and
Oh,
drinking, or just eating the whole lemon.
I love it. Can I go there? I just want to go and hang out in the school.
So much fun.
Oh, it's gorgeous. That's
Um,
amazing.
yeah. So, and we're all starting to understand the learning that's going on there as
Mhm.
well, which is fantastic. And it's such a, and that's more important than talking to them about um, the vitamins or the minerals, because of
Oh,
course at
100%.
that age they don't understand those
Got no,
concepts.
no, they can't
But
understand. It's too, yeah.
besides which, it doesn't make them eat it. It might make them eat it once, but it doesn't make them make, we're looking very long term. We
Mhm.
want the children to be making healthy choices when they're young adults, because they want to, because they've learned that it tastes good and makes them feel good, rather than because someone told them when they were 5 that, they could run really fast like a superhero if they ate their greens.
I love
Because
that
we
you've
know that's not going to happen.
I love that you've said that, Anya. It's the long term. We're not here for the short term goal. And research theories will say that you might get them to eat it once, but are they actually developing a relationship? They will actually then end up rejecting the food that you've pressured for them to eat. They don't develop this relationship with it. It is for the long term. It's
Yeah.
not what they eat today. It's what they eat in a week, a month, a year. Where are we heading? What's the trajectory? That's wonderful.
And if I could just interject there, of course, our world is no longer about just healthy food, because they're exposed to all sorts of foods as
Mhm.
everywhere and anywhere they go. So it seems even more important to me that it's vital that they just have this healthy, balanced view of food.
Mhm.
Um, so the idea that cake is okay, you don't need to eat lots of it, because there will be cake probably tomorrow or the day after.
Yes.
So, yeah, really important for them to just be given the opportunity to build this balanced relationship with food and eating across the board.
And I keep on getting more and more questions. I will have to wrap it up semi shortly because I know my children are going to arrive home and they don't have a quiet button when they come in. Um, often people say at childcare that the children might eat foods that wouldn't necessarily eat at home. How do you guys work with the families to be able to see to translate the amazing sort of results in inverted commas that the children are having at your centres to then have that play out at home? Do you have like education workshops for the parents, or do you just communicate, or is it sort of more like-minded families that then come to the centres?
So my kitchen has an open door policy, so anyone who wants to come in for a chat is allowed. They're very, very welcome.
Yes.
They are all warned, though, of course, if they get me started talking on my mastermind subject, they're a long time, so that they remember to just stop when I've gone on too long. On a practical level, we use the Story Park app.
Yes.
So there are lots of learning stories that are going out every day for all the children, with whether it's a food exploration thing, or in the kitchen, because we also use look and listen sheets to record, as part of the teacher's teaching and documentation. I'm afraid of sort of moving into a realm that I don't 100% understand. But basically, we're all trying to note down these learning stories wherever and whenever they're happening. So, of course, that's a really fantastic way to be communicating with families through that.
Mm.
Story Park as well involves them very much too, so that they can report back. So it's a two-way conversation. We would like to have more parent night type things. Various things tend to happen, like 2020.
Yeah, like 2020, exactly.
Plans for this year, and yeah.
I know it's become a noun, hasn't it? 2020, like, oh, let's do 2020, an adjective, sorry, not noun. So 2020.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'll ask one more question. Where do you get your inspiration from? Obviously, you have ongoing professional development and education. I know you recently graduated as a health coach as well. So where do you go for your inspiration for, building up your knowledge? I mean, you have a wonderful wealth of knowledge, but, how do you keep kind of up to date, or where would you recommend childcare chefs and cooks to be able to look for that?
So I have actually ended up doing a lot of study towards where I am now. Some of it probably not 100% necessary, because I'm definitely a nerd, and I think I have to accept that I'll always be studying something. And I've done a few nutrition courses over the years, and a few of them tended to be quite disappointing because I've done enough research, particularly into whole foods and wise traditions and things like that, real food. So some of the nutrition courses really kind of didn't hit the mark for me. The pre-cure nutrition courses most definitely have. They have been the best courses. Yeah, pre-cure, Prekure.
Are they based out of New Zealand, or is that international?
Yeah, based out of New Zealand, but it's all online learning. So you can do it anywhere you like. That's been the best nutrition course that I've done.
Oh, wow, that's great.
I'm still going, because they have lots of little modules, and beginner modules and more advanced ones, and I've done the beginner ones and now moved on to the advanced ones. And they're creating more courses so they can keep up
with your thirst and appetite for learning.
Yeah, exactly. And then the other ones, so I've done a lot of reading, and there are a lot of really, really quality authors out there. Joe Cormack.
Yes.
I've really enjoyed Simone Emery's website, and I have a lot of her webinars under my belt.
Yeah.
Fearless Feeding. There's countless others. I'm usually coming home from the library with stacks of books. Those would be ones that I would pull out particularly. And Joe Cormack actually has a book for early years. Yeah.
I probably have that here.
And a few years ago, I came across a semester course with the University of Idaho called Feeding Children in Group Settings, which was specifically with the idea for feeding childcare centres or kindergartens and school settings.
Yeah, wow.
Which, and it also delves quite deeply into Ellen Satter. Of course, Ellen Satter is another fantastic resource, and she has a lot of webinars that are very well priced. So for any childcare cook who's wanting to raise their bar, that's a good place to start, and just start working your way through the webinars.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, so that's some of the courses I have under my belt, and of course, the Curious Nutritionist.
Yeah, she's brilliant, Kelly.
Yeah. So there are a lot of people that I follow, and it's been really refreshing to see that the narrative around nutrition and feeding has really, really changed from when I first started in this industry. Very much more aligned with when I'd done the reading, what I was observing and reflecting on. That's the way it's going, which has been fantastic, because a few years ago I kind of felt like I was trying to swim upstream.
Oh, yeah.
Without anything to help. Whereas now there's so much support. I could jump onto any of the social medias and pull out really quality little pieces that I can hand on to the team that will really support them with their journey as well.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, I think that I'm excited. I know most of them, except for I'd love to have a look at the University of Idaho and the Procure one. That sounds really interesting.
Yeah. So I mean, there's definitely an opening for someone to provide all of this more concisely than the way I've done it, particularly for people who aren't so keen on studying, but they really want all of that information. Because for a childcare cook, it's definitely more than food safety,
Yes.
Basic hygiene. There's so much more that they can learn if they want to, and it's such a fantastic career path for them to take on. And I get very excited about that because I think people deserve the opportunity to do that. They don't have to just be in a kitchen churning out the same old food. Like, there's so much they could do.
Yeah.
So there are a few things coming up that I'm hoping to put together with looking to work with the Food Tree, who are a New Zealand company that have been doing PDs for childcare centres and schools, and we're slowly putting together a bigger package that will
Anya!
I think, but I shouldn't be saying too much because 2020 and a lot of our plans so far this year have
Failed. Yeah.
by 2020.
Have I just got the exclusive scoop?
Did actually. I'm hoping that she's not going to be having a go at me now but
wow.
She's got the opportunity to say, hey guys, watch this space because we're working on something.
Oh, that sounds brilliant, Anya. That is so exciting. So if people want to follow you, obviously I've tagged you in as Anya's Family Kitchen on Instagram. Is that the best place for them to follow you specifically? I know we talk about nurture early learning, which is brilliant, but you specifically as Anya's Family Kitchen?
Yeah, that would be a good place because, as I've said, there's a few things happening in the background, and that's where I will be able to say, hey, you're now best to go to, here or there. But yeah, and I actually am quite attached to my Anya's Family Kitchen because if I scroll back far enough, it actually goes back to my pre-childcare cook days when I was making jewellery, which seems very random. But it's actually quite nice when you scroll all the way back and see where you started, what you were doing. And I look back now, it's like, oh my God, I can't believe that we used to serve the food into the bowls and then hand it out. Like, what were we thinking?
I love it.
Is that
rain? No, it's not the kids. I think it's rain. The evolution of it, that is pretty crazy about social media, that it can capture all of that. Well, I am going to pause us there, Anya. Thank you so much. There is so many gold nuggets in there, and gold dust, as you mentioned. I love that word for childcare educators, childcare chefs, and educators, and parents as well to sort of grasp onto. Thank you so much for your time today. I feel very humbled to be able to talk to you and be able to share your knowledge and passion for food and for children and for feeding and eating. It's really simply wonderful. So thank you so much, Anya.
You're welcome, and thank you so much for asking me. I'm quite humbled.
Oh, no, it's so great.
Is happy for me to talk about this. So.
Well, there's plenty of people that have been very excited when I said that you were coming on, and Simone, and she'll be chuffed that you mentioned her because she was like, yay, when I said you were going to be on. So that's wonderful. So thank you so much, Anya. I'm going to pause it. If it cuts off, I will bring you back on just to say hello to you again afterwards. So I'll try and see if I can stop the recording. Before I go, though, everyone, next month in October, I'm going to be talking with Phoebe Cormack, who is a musician and registered music therapist. She's worked in a variety of different environments in Bear Cottage at Manly Hospital. She regularly runs music incursions with children at centres and private groups. She works with NDIS patients as well. And she is also my colleague with Musical Kitchen, which is our foodie music. So we'll be talking about not only music, of course, but the relationship with music and the brain, and then also with food. So I'm pretty excited about that for October. So I hope you enjoyed today's chat with Anya as much as I did. And if you have any questions for Anya, you can write them below this post when I upload it, or you can head over to Anya's Family Kitchen on Instagram or Facebook and get in contact with her there, because she has exciting things to come about, which is really exciting. I can't wait to see that evolve. So thank you so much, Anya, and I'll see everybody else in October.